Welcome, everybody, to 52 Living Ideas. We're continuing our series on Louis Sullivan's A System of Architectural Ornament. We're going to start today with Sherri Tracinski talking about the plate 3 on the organic and the inorganic. And then we'll go to Rob, who's going to be talking about Pythagoras. And then to Rupali, who's going to be talking about application of this to Indian temple design. So let's start with Sherri. Sherri.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I want to thank everybody for coming here today, and especially for everyone who was there last week when I was out absent from COVID. Everybody did a great job. I was lurking. I wasn't absent. I was there, but screen off and everything. But you guys all did a really great job, and I can't think of a better way for us to have talked about plate 2 than for Rupali to link it to the Montessori leaf plates or the leaf drawings, that whole project. So today I wanted to talk about the inorganic and the organic. We talked about this at the first chapter, the first 4-page reading that we did. And I want that we're now taking the step into plate 3, where we start talking about the inorganic. But always, before we start, I like to remember the seed-germ. So we're going to be talking about this today. So I'm going to read that first little bit from the introductory page again, or at least the last little bit of it, which is: the seed germ is the seed of power, and the will to live constitute the simple working idea upon which all that follows is based as to efflorescence. So we're going to be looking into that. Remember, we talked before about how for Sullivan, it's not only literal as a seed germ that flowers out, but this is also the beginning of a way of living. It's a way of thinking. And that is also what he means by the seed germ. So let's start here with, I'll have you bring it up in a second, Rob, but not just yet. I want to start with going back to our 4 pages at the beginning where we talk about the inorganic and the organic, because we have been in plate 1 and plate 2. Both of those are very much of the organic. And this plate 3, we step into a different ball of wax altogether. So here is where Sullivan is really starting to take that idea and branch it away from just the plant forms, and branching it away from the sort of thing that we saw with Christopher Dresser, who used it as, I believe the term he uses, art biology or something like along that line, where he's taken actual forms of plant life and making them into a 2-dimensional decorative patterning. So Sullivan's is looking at this in a different way. So if we go back to the beginning of that first essay, the inorganic and the organic, part of that first essay, he says, but nothing is really inorganic to the creative will of man. His spiritual power masters the inorganic and causes it to live in forms which his imagination brings forth from the lifeless, the amorphous. He thus transmutes into the image of his passion that which of itself has no such power. Thus, man in his power brings forth that which hitherto was non-existent. So, Rob, if you bring up plate 1 for us, or plate 3 for us, slide 1. As he brings this up, there we go. Okay, so this is a slightly blurry, and let me bring up my own so that I can read this a little bit better. Plates 1, 2, 3, plate 3. There's a couple of little paragraphs here, and I think this is probably too hard for you to read, so let me read them for you. We're going to read first this paragraph that's underneath the circle and the circle and the triangle that's over here on the left-hand page, or left-hand side of the page. And here he writes, these simple forms of ancient discovery and use were given esoteric meaning and occult powers by the men of that day in an effort to control, by means of formulas and secret rituals, the destiny of man amidst the power of nature. With mystic numbers and other phenomenon, they formed part of an elaborate system of magic to which the world pinned its faith. So I'm leaving this part to Rob, who's going to have a good time talking about Pythagoras and what Sullivan is talking about in this section. But before we get to the drawings, I also want to read to you his little section of text on the right-hand column. Underneath drawings, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, it's listed probably 6 and 7 if you can see the numbers underneath, because in these drawings across the top, you'll see he starts with a circle, and then imposed within the circle, he does each polygon, starting with 3 sides, 4 sides, 5 sides, 6 sides, 7 sides. And that's why in the circle in the middle between the 2 bars of text, you see the circle with all of those polygons superimposed. So you see the 3, the 4, the 5, the 6, and the 7-sided polygon all within the circle. So over here on the right, he says, here, however, a new faith is advanced, a faith in man, an unwavering faith that man, with his natural powers, developed and free, may and shall control his destiny through the finer magic of his enlarged vision and of his will to obtain master of the inorganic and the organic. He will, when he has found himself, become master of himself. And then in parentheses, he writes, see the prelude to this work. So he's referring you back to his 4 pages at the beginning of this work, where he talks about those powers that man has and how he can then master those. Then he goes on, technically, as an item in the progress of our demonstration, the above forms, rigid in their quality, are to be considered in our philosophy as containers of radial energy, extensive and intensive. That is to say, extension of the form along the lines or axes radiating from the center, or intention of form along the same or other radials from the periphery inward to the center. Here then appears the will of man to cause the inorganic and rigid to become fluent through his powers. Note also that we assume energy to be resident in the periphery and that all lines are energy lines. This may be called plastic geometry. Now, that's just one long paragraph and one itty-bitty short paragraph, but that is very densely packed, like a lot of Sullivan's writings. So there's a couple things that I want to really point out here. This issue of the breaking out and the breaking in. If you remember from Sullivan, it was Autobiography of an Idea. He writes, life was beginning to break in upon him from the outside, a continuous breaking in from the outside, and a breaking out from the inside was to shape his destiny. So that very same idea is what Sullivan is talking about here when it comes to the geometry of a circle and a square, a circle and a triangle. He's talking about that same thing. And watch when he draws these elements that the individual simple structure, the geometry, breaks outward from itself and inward. So if you take a look at this 4 lines of triangles just below the text on the left-hand side page, you'll see this happen. You see this triangle start. He's got axis lines through it, vertical, two diagonals. And then the first thing that happens is those lines, they break outward. And then the very next step is they break inward. And that is something that's a really fun parallel, I think, to really start thinking of that quote. He's talking about this. He talks a very similar idea in kindergarten chats too with his young pupil. He's talking about this not just as an organic form or what you do with a work of ornament, but this is also much more deep. This is much more about yourself breaking out and in your own world and your own experience. Now, the other really important thing that I want to point out here is he talks about the lines, or he's assuming these lines, the energy, to be resident in the periphery, and that all lines are energy lines. And that's something that I am really fascinated with as an architect, and that I know at this time there was no CAD programs. If you as an architect were drawing something, you were physically had your pencil or pen in your hand and you were drawing. This is why I want all of you, all of us, to be drawing too, because every time you put a line on a page, there's intention behind it. For the architect or the artist, each one of those lines is there for a reason. Now, those reasons may be more subconscious than we're thinking of. And I'm sure when you get a great deal of skill under your belt, those lines happen and you're no longer consciously thinking of them, but they are still energy lines. There's still force of thought behind those lines. And for an architect, if he's drawing a floor plan, those are commandments for crews of men to build something. So that one little line starts this process that will, potentially build a skyscraper. To Louis Sullivan, that line is not just on a page. Every one of those means something and means an awful lot. There's a lot of power that comes forth from those lines. And so with that idea, I want to take a little look at some of Sullivan's works, and I want us to also then be able to think of our own work further. Before we look at Sullivan's work, though, I want to continue delving in a little bit here, take a little more time to ponder what is actually happening here on plate 3. So we talked a little bit about this series of triangles. That's the line here on the lower right, excuse me. If you look below that, we have a series of polygons. And remember, we're starting here with a hexagon. And you see it ends up the very next step. It has a circle on the outside and on the inside. So our hexagon is suddenly contained. It's got almost like it's penned in a way. Or if you look 2 steps forward, it's almost like it's a vessel that it grows from forth, up and out. But you can see as you go to the very next one, the third of these 3, it's growing again, always in both directions. It's growing outward and inward. But this is a very, very typical Sullivan where it's almost plant forms. You can see the geometry still there, but it's growing in a form that is very, very plant-like. Now, if you take a step, and the reason I wanted to do these 2 examples here on the lower right first is because I think there's a different step happening over here on the lower left, where we have at the beginning a series of squares that sort of grow upon one another and they branch out and they do something in a way that is not maybe what you would think of as Louis Sullivan so much. These 2 over here on the lower right, those to us, if we've been studying Sullivan for a while, those really feel like Sullivan, but these feel a little more geometric, maybe not feeling so Sullivan to us. And there's a few ideas for why I think that's the case. We have this next one over where he starts with a hexagon, and then he makes it skinny and stretches it really long. And then the next step down, it grows in a different way. And then the next step, it gets pulled really far to the side. Still, we've got our 6 sides. But then at the very last one, we actually lose 2 sides. It gets pulled all the way out so that we essentially have this sharp pointed diamond. And he's growing these from this the prior step before it. But I want to take a look here at a few more of Sullivan's works. So Rob, can you go to the next page?
In theory.
In theory. Okay, so this is the Sullivan we all know. This is the Carson Peary Scott building in Chicago on State Street. This is that breaking out of that floral ornamental patterning that we're so used to seeing. This is really, when people are familiar with Sullivan, this is the sort of thing that we're used to seeing. We see this on the Wainwright building. We see this on almost all of the buildings that we know of with Louis Sullivan have this floral kind of patterning to it. You'll see carefully if you look that there is a geometry underneath it. Often it gets its geometry on the edges. You'll see that if you look at the vertical panel, you've got your arch, but if you go to the sides of the arches, you can see a sort of laddering pattern happening. There's geometry there, and the floral pattern grows out from it in the middle. But let's take a look at the next one. Oh, I'm sorry. Next one, Rob. Okay. So has anybody seen this one? This, very interestingly, now it's been since I think about 2008 since this was discovered. This is, excuse me, this is a lost Sullivan storefront on Wabash Avenue in Chicago. I believe the address is 22 Wabash. So next time in your Chicago, start heading up Wabash Avenue. This was towards, I think, the end. I don't remember what year it was covered, but it was slightly accidentally uncovered in 2008. They were taking off a boring glass front building, the elevation of a 4 or 5 story building, and they saw this interesting structure inside this storefront, and it took some research and took some diving in for them to discover, lo and behold, there was a lost Sullivan, which is particularly fun because towards the 150th anniversary of Sullivan's, the beginning of his career, there was several of his buildings that were lost. I mean, really horribly lost. A couple were just demolished and boring buildings put up in place, like nondescript buildings were put up in their place. Couple were lost from a fire, a flood, things like that. So but it was really sad to see all of these great buildings disappear, but it was a real treat to have one reappear. Well, what I particularly like about this one, when we're discussing this particular plate, is this is all about squares and triangles and diamonds and circles and how they interact and play with one another. So if you get a chance to go to Chicago to see this, it's a great thing to see in person. This particular picture is very hard to find crisp, clear pictures of it. So this one's a little pixelated, I apologize, but you can see these individual panels where there is it. I mean, it almost looks like we, on plate 3, we have the triangles. On the lower right, we have the hexagons. Well, this is almost like what he would draw if this were the one he described to us in circles. So we've got this circle, and then it breaks out on the inside, and they connect from one circle to the other. And there's a little bit of this intertwining, but it doesn't have that foliage pattern that we're so used to seeing with Sullivan. So for me, and for many of my fellow architecture students, when we were reading through this book for the first time as college students, we saw very much the floral part of Sullivan in his ornament and how that grew. But we weren't used to seeing this geometric side. And it's as important to Sullivan as the other. We're just not as used to seeing it. And part of it is because those were the things that were hidden or lost. So next slide, Rob. Here's another piece. This was part of the Chicago Stock Exchange that was, or the trading room floor. This was from the elevator grills. And you can see part of the trading room is in the Chicago Art Institute, and the archway to the building is out in the yard. And this particular copy, there's a couple different copies, a couple different museums have them in the US. This particular one is actually at the V&A in London. And it's in their ironworks collection. They have this very extensive, long hallway of ironwork, and this is part of their collection. And you'll see here, it's extraordinarily modern looking. I mean, you can see the seed-germ, can't you? But it also almost looks like little atomic symbols. There's like a spinning axis of the Earth and its planetary motions. There's so many things that you can see in this, and it's just this delightful grill from when you would ride the elevator. So this is a different geometric side of Sullivan that we're not used to seeing as much, because it's been either hidden from view or it's been torn down. Can we go on to the next plate, Rob? So I then wanted to take another step. Now, this is not Sullivan himself. This is Sullivan's student, Frank Lloyd Wright. And this is the playroom from Frank Lloyd Wright's home and studio. So this is where this was what he built for his children to play in. Gosh, can you imagine? So you can see this play on geometry that looks very much like that left-hand column on plate 3. If you look at the glass in the big glass windows on either side, but also in the skylight that goes across the top here. And if Rob, you can go to one more slide to see that up close. Okay, so this particular one I find really fascinating, because this is early in Sullivan's, in Wright's career, and you can still see a heavy influence of Sullivan. This is glasswork with a grill pattern over it. But if you look at this, I mean, to me, it looks like a garden plot. But you can see leaf forms stacked up, and you can see what almost looks like Sullivan plates down through the middle. So, as we all know, Frank Lloyd Wright was one of Sullivan's students, probably his most important student. They had a close connection. They worked very closely together, and Frank Lloyd Wright willingly, Frank Lloyd Wright doesn't admit much to anybody else other than himself, but he very much admits Sullivan's impact on him. So if we can go to the next slide, we'll take another look. This is, and I put this one in for Maritza when she gets here. This is Frank Lloyd Wright's Tree of Life stained glass window. And this is you can now purchase duplicates of it, not renovations. What's the word I'm thinking of? You can get a remake of this now where they actually spend a lot of time making it right. It's not just like a copy. It's a carefully crafted work of art. But you notice here, we have this patterning where the squares play on the squares and they break out into different shapes. And as it grows up, then we get this branching pattern that still played with squares. And if you see this as a tree, you can see where this is coming from, where this is going to, and how it's growing. And one of the little details that I always like to point out is notice all these little tiny play of squares and triangles up here in the branches of the trees. Look at how carefully he's changed the colors. They're not all just plain old green. He's got all these different shades of green, and some are red and some are yellow, some are bluish green, some are more amber, and he's got this sort of play that happens when the light comes through, they almost will flicker. So let's see another, Rob, one more forward. So here is another of Sullivan's skylights. Again, this is another play on the geometry. Now, I think that we know that Sullivan always talks about that this idea of ornament will be naturally growing forth from each one of us, and each will be individual. And for Frank Lloyd Wright, it very often became the geometric part of it. And this one is just an absolutely delightful play on squares and rectangles all the way down the hallway. And Rob, next one. And this one is my last slide for the day. This is the Hollyhock House glass work. And so I put a hollyhock next to it so you can really see where that growth of the idea came from for Frank Lloyd Wright. You can see how the hollyhock flowers come up this branch and they branch off at this angle. These are the details that Frank Lloyd Wright is keeping in the caming of his stained glass. But he breaks it off into triangles and breaks the triangles down further. And then every now and then you get a blossom that pops out in this lovely purple magenta color. And so I absolutely love putting the hollyhocks next to the hollyhocks, because you can really see, like in that plate 3 over on the far left-hand side, you can see this idea growing forth from the idea of what does a hollyhock look like? What are its essential elements? And how can I play with that in glass? So I'm hoping that is the end of my slideshow for today, but I'm hoping during our Q&A, we can see some of you having played with geometric forms and see where they grow for each of you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sherri.
You bet.
Excellent. Wonderful. Next up is going to be Rob. Rob, go ahead.
Oh, okay. All right. So, I want to see where I am here. There we go. All right. So what I wanted to talk about was something. So, it's this section that Sherri read earlier from this plate where it says, these simple forms of ancient discovery and use were given esoteric meaning and occult powers by the men of that day. And in an effort to control by means of formulas and secret ritual, the destiny of man amidst the powers of nature. All right, so who is he referring to there? And here's where I'm bringing in Pythagoras, right? Because this is famously, Pythagoras was an ancient Greek philosopher in the early 6th century BC, very, very long time ago, like late the 500s BC. Greek philosopher and mathematician, really the founder of Greek mathematics. And the thing is, the Pythagorean school, they discovered so many mathematical relationships, so many important discoveries in geometry and mathematics, that they actually began to develop a mystical awe of mathematics. And it's a belief that the universe is made of numbers, that numbers and shapes and these mathematical forms are central to the entire nature of the universe. The universe is literally made out of numbers. Now, one of the ways I think that reinforced that was they discovered, for example, that musical tones have a mathematical basis. So the whole mathematical basis of music was originally discovered by the Pythagoreans. So that must have just sent them over the top and said, see, we told you numbers were behind everything. Everything is numbers. Music is numbers. And so that's, I think, where he's getting this idea of, there were, esoteric meaning and occult powers. And esoteric is important because a lot of this knowledge was hidden. You had to be a member basically of, it was a school of philosophy and mathematics and also kind of a cult, right? You had to be a member of the Pythagoras cult to be able to get all the secrets of mathematics and geometry that they had uncovered. And also they did things like, there were certain ideas that they regarded as not to be shared with the masses, like the fact that the square root of 2 was an irrational number. Now, an irrational number, a specific meaning in mathematics is it cannot be expressed as a ratio of 2 other numbers, right? So, and in the decimal system, it's represented by the fact that, certain numbers like the square root of 2, it's 1.41, and then the decimal number just keeps going, and it keeps going, and there's new numbers popping up, and it's a pattern that doesn't repeat. It just keeps going in a basically essentially a random series or unpredictable series. So it means that you can never find some ratio of this number to that number that will capture the exact number of the square root of 2. And this is hugely important. Square root of 2, for example, is the if you make a square and you have the diagonal going across the square, that distance of that is going to be the square root of 2, which cannot be expressed as a ratio. So you have this basic, geometric figure, this basic geometric line that we can't express as a ratio of 2 numbers, which strikes at the heart of the whole Pythagorean system. So they often said that was dangerous knowledge that wasn't to be shared with the public, the existence of these irrational numbers. All right, so that's the history that he's referring back to in this idea of having this sort of esoteric and mystical occult view of numbers and shapes. And this actually reminds me, looking at all these drawings he has here of the different sides of shapes, the different polygons, reminds me of the fact that, so when I was a kid, when I was probably about 12, I did this project to actually construct out of cardboard the 5 perfect Pythagorean solids. Right, so these are all solid, 3-dimensional shapes that can be made by putting together other regular, polygons. So if, by regular polygon, meaning a polygon where it's all the angles are the same and the lengths of all the sides are the same. So a square is a regular polygon, right? So you can make a cube by putting together 6 squares. And so you have a solid object, a 3-dimensional object that's made up of a bunch of the same regular polygons put together. And that just, another thing that just, caused the Pythagoreans to get very excited. They have finally discovered the secret mystical meaning of numbers by discovering that they could make these. So the dodecahedron is 12 sides, all composed out of regular pentagons. And the icosahedron, which is 20 sides, all composed out of triangles with all the lines the same. All right, so and by the way, to give you an idea of the long legacy of this, my son's school for a long time, I don't know if it's still the case, but for a long time, its mascot, the school mascot, it was the raised icosahedron. So it's a form of the dodecahedron, a form of a dodecahedron or icosahedron that has little triangles raised up, like little spikes coming up from each of the polygonal faces, so that it was made entirely out of identical length segments aligned, joined into triangles to make this unusual looking It sort of looks like a what does it say? It looks like a sweet gum ball, sort of. Yes, this round ball with sort of spikes sticking up on it. And so this is like the ultimate geeky secret of, oh, we can make, here's how you make this raised icosahedron. I was going to find you an image for it, but I thought there'd be a little more time between me and Sherri, so I could look it up. I'll go find it later. But anyway, so you get the idea of the mystical awe that, and to give you an idea, another way of how this carries over is that Copernicus, when he was trying to come up with, trying to figure out the orbits of the planets in the solar system, the first hypothesis he began with that he actually had to reject in order to get the right answer was he had this idea that the orbits of the different planets in the solar system were in some way proportional to or based on because at the time they knew of five planets. He says, oh, well, they're based on and proportional to the 5 perfect Pythagorean solids, right? So this is literally the music of the spheres that the mathematics of the Pythagorean mathematics determined the shape of the solar system. And of course, he found out, no, it doesn't have anything to do at all with the Pythagorean solids. And he had to reject that in order to find the right answer. But this gives you an idea of the long sort of mystical awe in which these mathematical ideas were held. So here's where I want to talk about, go back to Sullivan now. And by the way, can you hear my dog barking her head off? Fortunately, we just got a delivery as this was happening.
Zoom does a very good job of,
okay, good. I hope you can't hear
it out. So it's faint. It's barely audible.
Okay. So he talks about this, that this was the ancients gave this esoteric meaning of occult powers. And they say, mystic numbers and other phenomena, they formed part of an elaborate system of magic to which the world pinned its faith. Now, clearly, that's not what Sullivan is talking about. So he says, here, however, a new faith is advanced, a faith in man, an unwavering faith that man, with his natural powers, developed and free, may and shall control his destiny through the finer magic of his enlarged vision and of his will to attain, master of the inorganic and the organic. All right, so this idea of a new faith that's a faith in man and his ability and the finer magic of his enlarged vision. So what, in a way you could look, if you look at what Pythagoras was doing, the Pythagoreans and this mystic view they had of geometry and numbers and mathematics, is that they had discovered something that really was magical, something that really was awesome in the sense of being powerful and exciting and capable of transforming the world. What they were discovering was the human power of abstraction. But what they did, and what Plato did following them, was having discovered this human power of abstraction, they didn't really understand what it was or where it came from. So they gave it a metaphysical basis. They imputed it. They said, well, we must have that. This must be something with metaphysical status. It must be a separate realm of numbers and forms that we are encountering, and not something that we as humans have created. And then what Sullivan's doing is he's coming around 2,500 years later. And he's saying, no, you don't understand. This is man's powers that we are encountering. This isn't something metaphysical. This isn't something occult. This isn't a realm of numbers or a realm of geometry. This is our powers expressing themselves. And so what he's setting up here is a new faith, which is a faith in the finer magic of man's natural powers, the powers of the human mind. So that's what I found so fascinating philosophically about this, is he's creating a sort of a secularized version of the Pythagoras cult, if you will, that he is taking this awe for the power of the human mind to understand geometry and think in geometrical terms. And now what he's doing is saying, no, this is magical, but it's the finer magic of man's powers expressing themselves. And then now the other part that I think that connects to is this idea that Sherri talked about earlier, about every line contains energy, right? So every line contains this magic of the human power of abstraction, the ability to create a line and make a shape. And then the tying back to what we talked about last week, where you have everything is about energy exploding out of, every part of the design that he's doing. This is the energy that's in every line, the energy of abstraction that's in every geometric shape, can then push outward and then push inward and be used to develop a much more detailed ornament. So this, this is the plate that I like the best of all of them, because that's my sort of preference in ornament. That's I studied mathematics at a fairly advanced level. That's my preference in ornament. That's I have that same Pythagorean-ish fascination with math. I told you when I was 12, I went and made them out of cardboard, found a way to cut them out of cardboard and put them together and make the Pythagorean solids. That's my fascination. So I really like the idea of taking a geometrical shape and using it as the basis of ornament. So when I get time to do some drawings, that's the next thing I'm going to do, is try to get you some really super duper let's play with geometry kind of using Sullivan's approach.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rob. So Rupali, if it's okay, I'm going to make some comments on Sherri's presentation and Rob's presentation, and then we'll go to you. Is that okay? All right. So Sherri, thank you so much for bringing up Frank Lloyd Wright and his ornamentation, because actually it provides the middle term between the inorganic and organic. Because if you look at bulk of ornamentation that Louis Sullivan has done, it is clearly organic. You can see the organicness, it is just of plant forms, expressed. But when you look at Frank Lloyd Wright, it has that organic quality, but it is done in a geometric, inorganic basis. So it is showing this connection. So I think that your presentation did a very good job of saying, look, it's not organic versus inorganic. It is how you are dealing with the material, whether you're seeing the patterns that are common to it. So I thought that was great.
Good.
So I really like that. Now with Rob, I want to add one more person here, and that is Buckminster Fuller, because there are two approaches to geometry, to mathematics itself.
I knew you were going to do that, Shrikant.
Yes. There is the Greek approach and the old Egyptian approach. Egyptian approach starts with trying to measure the world and then coming up with mathematics in order to do that. Whereas the Pythagorean approach is to posit something, have these definitions of, say, what a point is and what a line is and what a plane is, and trying to build up mathematics from that. So it starts abstract and tries to somehow relate to the physical world. So it is very much Platonic, or Plato is Pythagorean, because Pythagoras is the one who is inspiring the Platonic way of thinking. Whereas the Egyptians started with trying to measure the land, of trying to figure out, where are the boundaries, after the Nile flood has gone, and how do you measure and make sure that the fields are measured right after all of that. Very much of a this worldly problem. And what Buckminster Fuller does is that he does the same to geometry. I remember, I told, Rupali was visiting the New York area, and she called me and and asked me, can we meet? I said, no, I'm going shopping. And she was very alarmed at that. And I was shopping for these styrofoam balls, which we could work together. So we went and we made all these tetrahedrons out of the sphere packing. So the beautiful thing about that is that these are natural things that stack together, and patterns develop out of that. Like the tetrahedral pattern is basically 4 spheres trying to get together as much as possible, or triangle is 3 spheres trying to get together as much as possible. And Buckminster Fuller builds the mathematics, his mathematics out of that. So it is exactly the opposite. It starts with something real, something in reality, and natural patterns that emerge in interaction between physical things. That's how the mathematics is built. So, and what Louis Sullivan is explaining in philosophy, in language, Buckminster Fuller is trying to do in geometry itself and trying to show you how that works. So it's a very, very good companion to thinking about geometry in an Aristotelian fashion, as opposed to a Platonic fashion. So thank you very much, both. Next up is going to be Rupali, and then we'll have plenty of time for if either of you want to make any points. Go ahead, Rob.
Okay. I've got a couple little images that I wanted to search for before, and I found them now. So if I could just show that for just a second.
Go ahead.
And I'm going to here. Okay. So here is this is the sign for the school. This is the raised icosahedron in the middle here. So that's it. And then I found this is a good version of can you see this? The 5 solids?
Yep.
Right, dodecahedron, tetrahedron, octahedron, hexahedron, also known as a cube. So each one being, each of these lines is the same length, all these angles are the same angle, and all the shapes are the same shape, all put together. All right, so, and then the last one I just wanted to show you, if you can see it here, is I just had to show this because I saw it just now. A busy, cold night at Stonehenge as we move the stones backward an hour. All right, I can stop sharing now. He sends that out like twice a year whenever the daylight savings time changes, and I just stop laughing at it.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. All right, Rupali, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I want to share this pattern on my shirt. It's hexagons, the flattened hexagons with the leaf-like veins, but it's all very geometric. It's just circles along those veins. And I like patterns like this. And then the shirt inside is just concentric squares. So you can see these patterns really anywhere and everywhere that whether it's fabric and especially in Indian textiles, you can see these patterns. I was debating what I wanted to show today because the geometric patterns that we see in plate 3 in ancient Hindu and Jain philosophies, again, they had deep study of mathematics done back then. And so they created these yantras, or you can call them mandalas. And they have various geometric shapes within each other, or a play of shapes, perhaps even tessellation. And they have, mythical meanings about how the world is, or how things are arranged. And I was thinking, should I show that or not? But maybe I'll save that for the next week. And I thought, okay, I've been saying about the temples, and I'll make sure I talk about the temples today. So before we start looking at the temples, I want to read again, Sherri, you read this part, but I want to read it again, the inorganic and the organic, because Louis Sullivan reminds us to go back to this section. By the word inorganic is commonly understood that which is lifeless or appears to be, as stone, the metals, the seasoned wood, clay, or the like. But nothing is really inorganic to the creative will of man. I think this is such an important sentence, that it is the human being, the person who decides what's going to happen with that block of stone. His spiritual power masters the inorganic and causes it to live in forms which his imagination brings forth from the lifeless, the amorphous. He thus transmutes into the image of his passion that which of itself has no such power. Thus, man in his power brings forth that which hitherto was non-existent. For man is power, and the power is native in nature with the power of the germ of the seed. Thus, he commands at will the realm of the organic or living, and therein he creates as he wills, for he has the power to will. It is one of his many powers. So I'll read one more paragraph. Hence, for the germ of the typical plant seed with its resident powers, he may substitute in thought his own will as the seed of vital power, in figurative or imaginative or imagined seed germ, which shall be the utterly simple energy basis of a theory of efflorescence, involving concordantly a theory of plastic control of the inorganic. And so this plastic control of the inorganic, making it fluid, making it just evolve. The word efflorescence, just, blossoming, something coming into its fruition. These two elements of our premise are not to be considered separate conceptions to be harmonized, but as two phases of a single impulse of man's creative imagination and will. The will to create in the likeness of his emotion and his intellect, the passion to create in the image of his own power, the urge to create companions of his innermost thought. So I wanted to just rephrase, listen to that again so that we can look at these plates and continue from there. So here is, in India, you find a lot of examples of expression of forms, because just the sheer quantity of architectural edifices that exist. There are so many structures through different time periods as well as through various geographical locations. So the materials are different, time periods are different, the philosophies are different, but during all of that, all of those times, humans have created something that satisfied their need for their lifestyle and also their beliefs. So here, let's look at this inorganic material, stone. These are a series of caves that are carved into stone. And the Indian temple selection is very vast, and I'm just going to stick to three structures. The Buddhist caves in Ajanta, at Ajanta, these are in the western part of India. I'm going to talk about two Jain temples. So just sticking to Buddhism and Jainism, there's a lot in Hindu temples, there's a lot in Islamic art, but I'm not going to cover all of that. So if you look at this inorganic material, right, these are mountains and basalt mountains in which the caves have been carved. So the caves did not exist. These are rock has been removed to create these caves. So when we look at these structures, we can see that this is not a habitable space, but how did these Buddhist monks create this space for themselves? So here is an entrance to one of the caves, and you can see it's, they've carved out the pillars, they've got the Buddhist horseshoe arch, and very elaborate in terms of ornamentation, right? They have, the columns are fluted. I'll show the next slide, which shows what the columns look like. So on the base, they are just solid columns, but then you see the ornamentation going upward. At your eye level, they're just fluted in and out. So the arches that, the small semicircles that you see in the central band, those are, the stone just goes in and out. So it's recessed in a round manner. And then as you go up, you have this frieze of geometric shapes. And then you have the circle from where you can see the circle concentric circles, the shapes around it. And it's similar to what Louis Sullivan is talking about, that you're taking things from nature, and whether you're representing animals or humans. Now, in Indian architecture, you'll see humans and nature are placed side by side. They don't kind of separate completely. You've got the two animals and the face in the middle on the left-hand column, and then leaf-like. I like the word that Louis Sullivan uses, foliate. They just seem to foliate from there. So they're leaf-like forms that that are surrounding these geometric shapes. So here's another detail of another cave. Again, you can see, so these caves were built over 800 years, or, they were carved out over 800 years between the 1st and the 7th century AD. And you can see just simplistic designs, but as they get to the top, you have the amla design, which is a fruit in India, and then like a lotus blossom on which the lintel or the cave opening sits. Here's, you can see a little more elaborated forms on the bottom band. You can see the frieze. The feet of the Buddha are on a lotus form. Again, it looks like a lotus, but they have petals just opening upward and downward. And then on the columns, you see again diagonal shapes, vertical lines, diagonal recesses, just a play of shapes, geometric shapes in stone. So what's happening here? So this mountain, which was an inhabitable, just a rock, has been carved by human hand, by human mind, and made habitable. Not just made habitable, but a place that is very special. You can see that whatever they believed in, that they have made this place their own by carving relief that means, whatever their philosophy is or their lifestyle is. The Buddhas, the foliage around them is depicted in these caves. This is one of the most ornate caves in the series of caves. And you can see again the lintels or the top on which the rest of the arches sit. Very geometric segments. They are rectangular or squarish, and each of them has a band that kind of has the boundaries, but it's the repetition. It's the form of those columns separating the space for the to create the space for the Buddha and for the monks to gather. And the arched or the vault that you see on top is just carved out of stone to create an opening. It's not it's not a vault that's built like you would build with bricks. So this is carved and not built. Here is, I like this frieze. This is the Dhamek Stupa. which is like an obelisk. And on the surface, it's an obelisk around which the monks could go around while praying. But on the walls, you have these panels, and you can see the geometric patterns on the top, the frieze on the top, and then you have the floral bands, and below that, that really reminds me of Louis Sullivan's work. You can see that it has the central axis, but then you have the two going outwards with the foliage just evolving from its shape, and carrying on a life of its own, that you can see it has vitality in its shape, and yet it's all made in stone. So when Louis Sullivan talks about using man's creative powers to bring inorganic to life, that this is an example of that. We'll move on to, so here I want to read this part. Here, however, a new faith is advanced, a faith in man, an unwavering faith that man, with his natural powers developed and free, may and small control his destiny through the finer magic of enlarged vision, and of his will to attain master of the inorganic and the organic. He will, when he has found himself, become a master of himself. Technically, as an item in the progress of our demonstration, the above forms, rigid in their quality, are to be considered in our philosophy as containers of radial energy, extensive and intensive. That is to say, extension of form along lines of axis radiating from the center, and or extension of the form along the same or other radials from the periphery towards the center. Here then appears the will of man, to cause the inorganic and rigid to become fluent through his powers. Note also that we assume energy to be resident in the periphery, and that all lines are energy lines. This we may call plastic geometry. And I really like the way he's shown the triangle. You can have the vertical axis and the two axes along the midpoints of the sides, then forming the outer shell with three obtuse angled isosceles triangles. So now it's got a curved shape, and then he brings the inner triangle inward by pressing it to get a trifoil in the center. So similarly with the square, you can have a square and those diagonal axes. Each of those diagonals then have their own centers, and you can have a form evolving from the center. As it goes down to number 12, you have a quatrefoil around a diagonally placed square. And so does the hexagon evolve, with the hexagon and the circle playing together. So then we come to the Jain temples. I just wanted to kind of have that image in our mind as we look at these temples. So Jain temples were temple cities that were built on hilltops. And these occur in a part called Rajasthan and Gujarat. So these are on the western part of India. And this area has a lot of marble. So the same marble that is used in Taj Mahal, we talked about Taj Mahal a couple of weeks ago, is the same marble used here. So the material is the same, but now you can see how it's used differently in this case. This is the entrance to the temple. And there are several temples in this complex, and here's one. And you can see how ornate the columns and the walls and the ceilings are. You can see everything is limited by the geometry of the shapes. But within that geometry, there is efflorescence, like Louis Sullivan would say, that this artist has taken that scalloped shape and then just gone in and carved more details. Here is the ceiling, and you can see how the ceiling, so there's a square. If we just look at the shape, right? The square, there's a square. In the square is an octagon. In the octagon is a circle. In the circle are several circles. Those several circles have those radiating axis on which you have, again, more concentric circles. Within those concentric circles are finer designs, finer details. You can see that kind of design on the column that's going upwards. You know, the stone is carved almost like filigree. It's so fine. And so when I went there, I went to these temples in 1990s when I was studying architecture, and you just can't stop. You're just mesmerized. You can't, you stay in one place and you can't stop taking it all in, because you look at this more and you look at this more and this more. The more you look, the more you see. And there are all these recesses and layers on top of each other that just have a wonderful play with all of the shapes. Here is another roof. I'm not focusing on the entire temple. I'm just going to focus on the ceiling. The ceiling tiles in different parts of the temple. So here is an inlay work. Again, just a play of concentric circles. And within that, the leaf form. So we saw similar leaf form in the slide that Sherri showed with Louis Sullivan's glass work. And, you know, it reminded me of the leaf form. So you can keep looking deeper and deeper. And if you look at the Jain philosophies, they talk about looking inward. And these circles are just allowing you to go inward, just focus more and more and more. And you're just kind of sitting there, taking it all in. And it's all this magnificence of nature. But it's not exactly a plant that you can recognize. You can see in the outer bands, there is like a quatrefoil shape that just weaves around in a circle. And within that woven pattern is a flower-like thing. And it just continues to blossom. Here are two other ceiling tiles that you can see. So in the one above, so these are all ceiling tiles. So you have human forms with natural forms in these tiles. And you can see the center is a radiant sun-like thing on the top, in the top panel. You have a quatrefoil. That quatrefoil expands into a circle. The circle expands into 8 scalloped foil shape, and then is bounded by the recessed squares. Now, if you look at Louis Sullivan's squares with the diagonals, and he talks about each of those squares becoming a center, well, now you look at the axis radiating from the center on the diagonals, you have more circles, like the form just evolves into more squares with circles in them. And there's this entire foliage growing around it. And then you go further out, it's bounded by delicate scalloped squarish shapes. And that's all recessed above this frieze of humans. So there are all these layers that are in play. And there's this movement, like a circular movement in all those squares. So the square is no longer a rigid shape, but there's movement within that. And then you look at the panel below. This is another ceiling in there. And here you have the same kind of a circular, like a sun-like disc starting in the center. But the expression here is completely different. Again, it's squares and circles. So you have this, you can start from the center going out, or you can start from the boundary coming in. This reminds me of the first plate that we made, where you have the square and those little dots all around. And so you have this geometric shape, but I absolutely love the borders on this because they look very modern to me. They're very organic. They have this swirly feel to it. They're almost like ellipses with the tree of life. So Sherri, you showed us a tree of life expressed geometrically by Frank Lloyd Wright. Now, I guess all cultures have some form of a tree of life. And this is called the Kalpa Ruksha, which means whatever you wish, your wish is fulfilled. And so that's the Hindu or the Jain way of looking at. And you see this tree of life in many forms in Indian architecture. But here's a very, I like this because it has the fractal nature of circles within that oval shape. And if you look at the details, so when Louis Sullivan, Shrikant showed us his tetrahedron last time, and you have the fractal within the fractal within the fractal. And I feel that this particular ceiling has that quality in it, where you start with the center and you're expanding, and then you expand further with the square placed diagonally on itself. And then you come to these 8 rosettes-like things, which are complete in themselves. You could take one rose, one of those flowering shapes, and look at it and the intricate detail. So you again have a center for that. Around that center, you have the radial energies. Around those radial energies is the blossoming. It's almost like a calyx holding the flower in it. And then again, that form expands to have a more curve, and then it's encompassed within a circle. And then you have the foliage going out in the circle. And this is all recesses inwards. There's a plate. So when we looked at Louis Sullivan's first plate, and we talked about how there's an interplay, it's not just a flat piece of stone, but there's an interplay of layers. That's what we see here. And then there's a geometric edge with recesses going in and out along the square border. This top panel, I really like it. We talked about Louis Sullivan's triangle. So here, the center starts with a trifoil. So it's a curvilinear triangle with 3, so it's an equilateral triangle with 3 foils. And within the foil, you can see the radial extensions, like maybe the pistils of a flower. And then around that triangle, you have 6 more foils to form the hexagon. And that's encompassed by a circle, almost like a garland. And then the scallops have the trifoil within them. So when we talk about the integrity of the shape, the Louis Sullivan says, don't forget the seed-germ. Don't forget where you started. Don't forget the integrity of your idea. Continue on that. So here you see that. And then there is, again, the movement on the border. And this is just the inside of a larger tile. So on the outside of the tile, there are furthermore the foliate and efflorescence that continues. The bottom panel, and these are all within the same temple. These are all ceilings within the 5 temples. And they're just mesmerizing, just mesmerizing. So you can see here again, it has similar to the plate we saw before, but the expression is different. And so when Louis Sullivan says, look, you can take geometry, you can take what's in nature, and there are so many variations. You look at the trees outside, you look at a canopy. I'm sitting in Shrikant's niece's bedroom and just looking at the foliage around. Different colors, different shapes, different sizes. There are all these levels of trees. You see that in this stonework, and it's hard to believe that it's stone because it's made plastic in the hands of the sculptor. So just the attention, again, I think we can all see the radial energy going from this simple, it's such a simple shape, and just flowering out. You can perhaps relate it to some of the flowers that we see in nature. There's a plate called the Pentagon, the Awakening of the Pentagon in Louis Sullivan's. So it's the next plate, plate 4. And that's one of my favorite plates, the Awakening of the Pentagon. Who would think of that, right? That the Pentagon awakens. But here it is. Here you see the awakening of a hexagon. You start with a hexagon, and around the hexagon, the scalloped hexagon on the top, you have the quatrefoil, 6 quatrefoil shapes that are arranged, each complete in their own self. And then you have the scallops. The scallops are again complete in themselves. They're recessed. They are actually hanging down. So these are all hanging. So when you look at it, the first layer you see are those innermost hexagonal foils, and then you see the quatrefoils. Then you see the larger scallops further up. Above that is the larger circle with recesses going in. So it's a dome and it's like a chandelier with layers hanging down. The one below is quite exquisite with its delicate flowers, like shapes. So you have, it reminds me of jewelry that, you see pendants like these, that you have the center, and from that center radiates everything. And just the sheer burst of energy to give and I'm going to use the word efflorescence because that's what it is in this picture. You see in this fine filigree that this burst of little flowers around the band in the middle, and then again surrounded by fine filigree of leaf-shaped things or geometric shapes, very, very true to the geometry. And from, just taking minute segments of a circle and expanding outwards, and then bound by an octagon at the very end. And around the octagon is all the flowering of the shapes. So here is another ceiling. And here you can actually see the layers in that stone. And you can see how fine that carving is. So for the sculptor to know the material so well and be able to then create this, right, where you don't chip off. And even today you can see this artisans at work doing this kind of work, thousands of years later, they're still making these kind of pieces, carved pieces. If you're in the US, you can see in Houston, in New Jersey, they're building temples like this. Now, Louis Sullivan would not like that at all, because he would say that belonged to a time, you know, in the 1400s, they were evolving these shapes. It meant something to them. What is it to you today? So right now they're copying, but you can see this work still being made. I personally feel like Sullivan does, that we can evolve and have more shapes because there's so much variation. But again, the efflorescence you can see in this, every detail, all the layers are different. In each of the layers, then you have the flowers in the band almost towards the end. All those flowers are complete. Again, those flowers have 3 layers or 4 layers. And then you have the scalloped border. The scalloped border also is we saw the hexagon kind of compressed. Here it's a parallelogram. You can see the parallelogram, and within the parallelogram, you have those scallops. And then they rest on these statues and the pillars, the columns below. Here's another plane geometry. Here's another, okay, so this is just mind-boggling, because those square plates are so delicate and thin, and they hang from the ceiling. There's no wire holding them or no chain holding them. This is just stone carved and placed in over those columns. And so when he says, look, you know, actually he has that quatrefoil, the last number 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, I think, where he has the square and the circle around it and the quatrefoil. You can see this over here. You can see what he means over here. Each axis, he says, look at it. You can have the central axis that is dominant, but no, you don't need it to be dominant. It could take another form. In nature, you could have many axes. And so we saw last time that in nature, you could have a leaf, and the leaf could have radial axis. Each axis on its own is complete. And you see that in this ceiling. So this is my favorite ceiling. It's hard to believe that it was done in the 15th century, because it looks so modern. I have a pendant that looks like this, which is so modern. But this is the tree of life. And it's called Kalpa Ruksha. Whatever you wish will be fulfilled. And you start with the concentric circles, and those concentric circles enlarge. And there's this frond-like feeling to it, where it's a tessellation of circles. If you look at the central, curved piece, they're little circles, but they're like ferns. They're like ferns unfolding. And then you have the filigree of the vegetation growing outwards. And then it goes, the plate around it are the lotus blossoms going out. And the border again is that swirling creeper, like a vine growing. So this style of architecture is called Maru Gurjara style. And what it means is there are all these temples that are formed by creating recesses in their facade. And so if you look at the plan is a square that's kind of just expanding in and out. So you have these recessed surfaces. These temples are raised on a large plinth. So you see you're climbing up a large number of steps to get there. And the plinth offers a facade for decoration. So you'll see a lot of carving on the plinth. And then when you get to the columns are decorated. And each nook and cranny has all these ornamentation with statues and, the foliage forms that then just keep leading you upwards. And you can just see those recesses. So here's another temple within that complex. Let me just see. These are the Ranakpur temples. So these temples were made after the Dilwara temples in Mount Abu, but they follow the same style of architecture. So you have this platform where people can gather, and those platforms are created by supporting the roof on columns. And then the shrine is, you walk inside the shrine towards the back, but you can see that all of these columns have this amazing ornamentation. And two columns side by side are symmetrical and alike, but then the next two columns are slightly different, and the next two columns are slightly different. So, and the bands, horizontal bands of all the columns are about the same height. So you see this continuity of form as you walk through the temples. But and the ceilings that I showed before sit on top of these columns. Here's one, which is similar to the one we saw before. And here are the flying arches, which are very typical of this style of architecture. And they are merely decorative. They don't support but I like the serpentine shape to them. There is a column and a lintel that support the domes above, but these are just merely decorative. And sometimes the place where the arches spring from have an animal shape or a human shape, or it might be like a stem from where everything springs. So here is a detail of where the columns spring from, and you can see the curved lines. Again, the bracket itself has its own ornamentation, a lot of detailing. And then the friezes are very geometric. You have the circles, and the vertical lines form all the human forms. There are ceilings. Here is a ceiling. This ceiling reminds me of Shrikant's triangle. But you see, so the center is, so this ceiling actually has the center, the Jain philosophy of you are the center, you have that spirit, the spiritual being in you, and you focus on your center. And around that center are the Jain gods, or the Tirthankaras. And they're arranged, there are 24 of them. I don't know if they're all 24 here, but they are arranged in a very geometric pattern. And you see the square and the circle along the diagonals, along the vertical axis, the horizontal axis, and all encompassed by this foliage forms, leaf-like forms, and then bounded by a geometric circle. So this is the idea of the male and the female energy. So you can see in the center is the male and the female energy depicted, and that's within you. Both energies are within you. And the knots are your karmas, or the things that you do. And those knots, so this is a symbol of how Jains perceive the idea of karma and the self. And there's the center and the periphery. So, but if you look at just the geometric design of it, you have the center, the circle, the center, the vertical axis, horizontal axis, along the radial axis are the knots. And then on the border are these lotus blossoms. So here's the Dilwara complex. Here is another variation of the same idea of what life is. And I don't know the meaning of this particular plate, but this particular ceiling. But you see, it's actually the shape of the legs in the center form an octagon. And there are 5 beams that come together to the head. And then the shapes evolve in a circle. In the corners of the square that bounds the circle, you have an animal-like shape with horns. And outside that, at the midpoint of that square, you have a vertical or a diagonal axis around which is the male and the female energy, and then bound by some serpentine leaf-like forms around which are the squares and more foliating forms. And I think I will stop here only because my cursor is just spinning in the rainbow wheel.
All right. Thank you, Rupali. That was amazing. Now I want to check one thing here. Sam, thanks for joining. Give me just a second. I'm going to unmute. Do you want to talk about the stained glass work that you've done? You're on mute. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to.
Let me
Sorry,
go ahead
I'm not.
and share it. Can you guys see it? Or is it all mixed up with stuff?
I can see it.
Guys, somebody else? Can you see it? Okay, good. Go ahead, Sam.
Progress.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not calling from the best place right now. I'm just walking somewhere. But yeah, the inspiration for this was really Shrikant's. I think it was the last video you did on Louis Sullivan, the Radiant Hexagon series. And to be honest, I found like your synthesis of his ideas when I was reading kindergarten chats, like it completely gone over my head, this kind of how he kind of integrates all of man's powers into this like unified picture. I think it's really really interesting. So I kind of based the color scheme for it and the concentric circles of the design on that, with the the different sort of petal forms resembling thought, action, expression, beauty, attention, focus. I think it's just a really good way to sort of visualize life. It stops you from getting too bogged down in one aspect of it. And especially like the movement out towards the edge where I've used the sort of more clear glass. Yeah, I don't know, hopefully that goes some way to explaining it.
Hey, can I add something here? Sam, I really like your stained glass work. I love your description of it. I love your use of color that spirals out. And I love this idea that the clear glass is on the outer part of the spiral where the thinking becomes ever clearer. I love that. And beyond anything else, I love that this is inspired by your reading of Louis Sullivan. Thank you so much for sharing this.
No worries. Yeah, I mean, the idea is that towards the center, it's like where things are integrated.
Mm-hmm.
And then the vibrancy, like as you go out, that's kind of like dissipating into the void, I guess. But it was just a really fun thing to make, and glad I could share it with you.
How long
Wonderful.
did it take you to make it?
It took about a week. It was a lot of
Yeah.
late nights, but
Yeah.
the actual way you make it is quite sort of do it yourself. You can just buy a glass cutter online. I just got loads of offcuts of glass, which made it a lot cheaper. And then if you wrap them in like copper tape, you can then solder them together
Mm-hmm.
just with lead. And then you can buy like this liquid that you can stain the lead with.
Yep.
And then yeah, I just built the oak frame for it as well.
How large is it?
It's a good question. I guess you'd want it in feet and inches.
No, you can do it in centimeters. That's fine.
Okay. It's about 200 millimeters wide, and
Okay.
yeah, I don't know how tall it is.
Well, it's really lovely. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Sam, for sharing. Appreciate that.
No worries. Thank you for letting me.
Excellent. All right. So back to Rupali, does Sherri, do you have any comments on Rupali's presentation?
I absolutely love our tour of Indian architecture. One of the things I wanted to ask was the first ones that you showed us, the carved temples, those were basalt, am I right? And that the
Yes.
Okay, and then the others were all made of marble.
Yes.
It reminds me very much of the difference between Egyptian art, and which is usually made of granite and sometimes basalt, and Greek art that comes after it, which is also made of marble. There's something about the nature of the material that makes it better suited to its marble is such fine grain and soft, easy to carve, to get that real delicacy, that real movement that feels, like flower petals.
Yeah.
It's just exquisite. And I love that their craftsmen are still using that today. But I agree with you about the idea of it. I like them doing it in a way that's appropriate to their forms of today. But it was really striking when you showed the basalt temples and then the marble temples, that it reminded me so much of the same thing we see in other cultures, with changes with different material causing a radically different aesthetic that comes from it, much more attuned to the material, what the material allows it to become.
Yeah, very true. I want to read this last part where Louis Sullivan talks. Actually, I'm jumping to the next page in our book, but I think it says it very clearly. Any line, straight or curved, may be considered an axis, and therefore a container of energy. You can take off from any direction, and a directrix of power. There is no limit to variation or combinations or to morphology possible. The main axis, of which the axis of the seed-germ is here taken, is the primal time, may become secondary in development. A secondary axis may dominate all. Axis may be expanded, restrained, combined, subdivided, made rigid or plastic or mobile or fluent in every conceivable way. They may be developed inorganically or organically. They may be developed as stolid or as filled with the life impulse. They may be dramatized from the heavy and the ponderous to the utmost delicacy of rhythm, the most subtle palpitations of life. But that all this be taken from the realms of the transcendental and brought into the physical, tangible, and even psychic reality requires that the spirit of man breathe upon ideas the breath of his living powers, that they stand forth, created in his image, in the image of his wish and will, as demonstrations of man's ego power. I look at the temple and say, Amen.
Wow.
Then he
ahead.
goes to say the advanced student who wishes to integrate the power that antedates the seed germ, which in reality is sort of embryo, is then referred to the cell in development. And I think I'll go read that book next, The Cell in Development and Heredity. But boy, I mean, he writes just a short paragraph, but so much is packed in that paragraph.
Okay, Rupali, I want to show you something.
Sure. Welcome. Oh, my goodness, you have a three-dimensional.
There you go.
There he is.
Oh,
wow,
there we go.
look at that. Look
So
at this.
that's for you. That's for you.
Oh my goodness,
Yeah.
thank you.
So this
I love
is,
it.
yeah. So this is an octahedron. You see, last time I showed you tetrahedron. This is an octahedron. You can see this is actually half of it.
Yeah.
So it's octahedrons in octahedrons in octahedrons. So
They
again,
keep going in and in and in, just like the ones that we
Oh,
saw.
wow.
They're three-dimensional, and even in this cave, you can see it.
Wow. Shrikant, is this what came last week?
I think so. I think he
Yeah,
was waiting for
yes.
this.
Is
Yes.
this what got delivered last week?
Yes, exactly.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Look at that.
That is amazing.
Thank you, Shrikant. This is
Yeah.
amazing.
You're welcome. Because I think I love these. Can you hold it up one more time?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. See, I mean, the thing is, I love actually the octahedrons more than the tetrahedrons because you can see the fullness of it and you can see the angles. They're all, it's much more richer structure. Now, of course, if you look at just one side of it flat, that is again the Sierpinski's triangle. But this is Sierpinski's triangle in the octahedral form. So it's just incredibly beautiful. And what it does is that, to me, like, you know, I don't know, I think I want to ask Rob. Rob, do you find this interesting? Because this is like pure geometry done in an organic way. Go ahead, Rob.
You're muted.
Yeah, I do find it interesting. I would like to see more variation of it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But
what do you mean variation?
So talking about the octahedron, that it's the same pattern over and over at each level. I would like to see some variation where the pattern changes and it goes back and maybe, you know, has two different patterns that it goes into and out of or something like that.
Yes.
But
Yes.
I do appreciate very much the geometric nature of it because that is my interest.
Yeah.
So
Wonderful.
Rob, you'd like to see a motif presented and then altered.
I think it needs like one extra layer of complexity on top of it.
I think and the axis taking off. Not this is right now just on one axis, and maybe
I've seen some one of the interesting things I've seen is I've seen like a curve, just this one, but all curved. So it's like you instead of having lines, you have curves, which is actually very beautiful. But I can see what Rob is saying because it's a question. I mean, if you look at Louis Sullivan's ornament, it is one motif, and then the second motif organically depends on it, but it does something new. And you know, and then there is another one that does that. So absolutely, excellent point. All right, so now let's open it up for any comments from anybody who would like to speak. We're going to go to Iris next. Iris, go ahead.
Last week, within an hour, of ending the meeting. I was looking in the newspaper. Let's see if I can make this show up. Okay, these are milkweed, and I've always heard that butterflies, monarch butterflies, only eat milkweed. What I didn't know is that there are a lot of different kinds in different areas, and these are each flower has 3 parts, but they look dramatically different. You know, they'll be round in one plant, and then the other one will be very pointed. Some have swirls to them. It's just really fun to see something like that happen so simple in nature. Okay.
Thank you, Iris. Anybody else, if you'd like to make any comment on any of the presentations, go ahead and type exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom. Jeannie, you're next.
Shikha, may I just say something about?
Go ahead, Rupali, and then
Iris, we just had pumpkins at our school, and one thing we noticed, if you look at a pumpkin from the top, the place where the stem ends is a pentagon. And it's a beautiful pentagon that just then curves up to form the stem. And it's lovely to see the sphere or the ovoid on the bottom and a pentagon on the top, and then coming out as a stem. So your flowers reminded me of that. And I especially love the cotton flower. I've seen it in person, have grown it, and know how beautiful those pods look.
I remember first cutting an apple horizontally and seeing the star shape inside. So there are all these shapes inside organic things that we don't notice. Jeannie, go ahead.
So I wanted to say a couple things first about the platonic solids. When I first hit that and I said, there's only 5, I just could not believe it. And I struggled and struggled to find the 6th platonic solid, although everybody discouraged me from that. So another thing I wanted to say is about the fluorescence. And the fluorescence is not the object of the plant. The object of the plant is to create a new plant.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in a way, this is very similar to the humans branching out into culture, basically, that it's not a necessary thing for us, but somehow this is the thing that makes it all beautiful. It makes it beautiful in the plant world, and it makes it beautiful in the human world. And I think also that, it's not just the organic and the inorganic. Both of those are physical, but there's the metaphysical. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to compare that to the fluorescence, because that in our human endeavor is sort of, we're reaching toward beyond. And it's even proved by Rupali's presentation of the temples. I mean, this is a place of worship that's been made into a place of beauty as well. So I like to connect that. I started with the cosmos leaf, and I drew a number of them. And the leaf itself is very complex. I mean, this isn't the leaf, it's the whole thing. Mm-hmm. And it's just like almost the veins alone have formed the plant. And then I realized I was kind of abstracting, because I ended up looking at structure and making the leaves a little too short, and then simplifying. And, by getting into it, you start with the natural, but it begins to abstract quite a bit. And then I put it into a spiral. And there's many problems with doing this, because, it gets very dense on the inside, and you've got all this overlap. And I'd like to try more to have the overlap more woven like, that mm-hmm. Some of them go over others. And that's what I had. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation.
Jeannie, I love the cosmos flowers. They're so and so pretty, and they have this just the bright energy that you need on a rainy day.
Jeannie, I want to comment on what you said. It is a great point that, all these trees are trying to reproduce themselves. But in order to reproduce themselves, they have to grow. So there is sympathy, to use Louis Sullivan's term, between growth and filling out space through efflorescence and creation of new life. Like, they have to do this in order to create new seeds that will go further out. So there is this back and forth relationship between creation of these new centers and growth. So that's beautiful point. Thank you for, and it very much relates to the human situation of individual and society, individual and good society. There is this back and forth that happens. A good social system will enable individuals to flourish, and such individuals will support healthy society. So there is this back and forth between individual and interaction between individuals. So beautifully brought up.
Can I add to that from the autobiography of an idea?
Yes.
So towards the end of the book, he says, "The dream has never ceased. The faith has never wearied. With the passage of the years, the dream, the faith, ever expanding in power, became all-inclusive. And with the progress of the dream and the faith, there emerged a confirmation, a vague outline, growing year after year, more luminous and clear. When the golden hour told, all mists departed, and there shone forth, as in a vision, the reality of man, as a free spirit, as a creator, as container of illimitable powers for the joy and peace of mankind." And I think, Jeannie, to your point about the spiritual peace, right? What is this for? Is humans want to live in joy and peace. And so that's, every human being has that creative energy to create. And boy, we are all those containers.
Thank you. Thank you, Rupali. Next up is Iris. Iris, go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to show something that I bought last year. This is an okra, and it was so perfect. It looked like it was cut out of marble, just all straight. And I thought maybe I could preserve it. I put gold sparkly nail polish on it. But what happened is it shrank down to the seeds, and I think that's beautiful too. So it's just a wonderful shape.
Yeah, it looks like a jewel.
Yes. And then this is something I did decades ago. Let's see if I can make it show.
Yep.
It's a business card, and it's blind embossed. It's just white on white. And,
Oh, that's pretty.
Ferns, and just repeats. Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you. Folks, this series is amazing. It's just so many people bringing up so much. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sherri. Thank you, Rob, Rupali. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Iris, and thanks, Jeannie. This has been an amazing episode, and we will go next to what? Sherri, what do we do next?
Well, I think we should all, well, what's the exact word he uses? We should all awaken. Whether it wants to be a pentagon, I think we should all choose our own polygon, but I think we should all take a chance and test our abilities to awaken whatever polygon we choose. We know Shrikant has already awoken the triangle, so maybe you need to awaken something else, Shrikant.
Rupali, what are your ideas? What can we do?
So I piggyback on Sherri's idea. Last time I said, play with the polygons. We really didn't get to doing that today. So next week, let's do that. And I'll talk about the mandalas and the yantras, which use the geometric shape, just for the design element, looking at it purely from the geometric angle and what geometry can do.
Perfect. I also want to kind of, in closing, I want to say that Sherri's observation, connecting up the quote from autobiography of, life began to break
Breaking
in.
out.
Yeah, but breaking in on him from outside and breaking out from the inside. This continuous breaking in from the outside and breaking out from the inside was to shape his destiny. Connecting that up with the polygons, I think is fantastic, because it really shows kind of the, human will on one hand and reality on the other hand. You're going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, doing the transformation of reality in accordance with your will operating in accordance with reality, and going this kind of massive interaction going on, and everything that you see, all this complexity that we see, is result of that back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So thank you so much. All right, folks, see you next week. Bye.
Bye.